On the eve of the Princess of Linhai's wedding, she sorrowfully begged to enter the palace and said to the new emperor, "Brother, the newly appointed scholar has long been in love with the third daughter of the Duke Shin's family. Please cancel the marriage grant and fulfill this perfect match." The emperor, enraged, demoted the scholar. As for the third daughter, she was carried into the imperial harem in a small sedan chair. When the princess came to find Peiji, it was raining. My elder sister stood under the long corridor and said coldly, "Shin Jingtang, when you hand over the stolen gold and jeweled earrings, you can get up." I knew which earrings she was talking about. They were gold-threaded and jeweled, with 7 identical gemstone pendants, each adorned with pearls, glass, and red gemstones, shimmering luxuriously as they moved. I had seen them in her makeup box while doing her hair in the morning. By noon, when my elder sister wanted to wear them, she found them missing and had me brought over. I remained silent, hearing footsteps approaching from behind. "Shinjingfu, is this your third sister?" My elder sister's expression changed, and she rushed into the rain without an umbrella, her voice ingratiating. "Your Highness, she stole my earrings and refuses to admit it, so I punished her to kneel here." "The princess?" The visitor came before me, and a palace attendant lifted my chin, making me raise my face. She stared at me intently. I avoided her gaze, lowering my eyes, awaiting her judgment. I knew why the princess was here. Rumor had it that the Princess of Linhai was interested in Peiji. But Peiji's heart was with me. My elder sister didn't forget to add fuel to the fire. Shinjingtang's birth mother was a courtesan. A rotten bamboo can never produce good shoots. I didn't need to look to imagine her expression as she said this. Her mouth turned up in a sneer, her eyes and brows showing cold contempt. The Princess of Linhai looked at me for a long while, lost in thought, and said, "Your face is indeed pitiful. No wonder Peiji is so captivated." My heart skipped a beat. The Princess of Linhai squatted down, disregarding her embroidered skirt getting soaked in rainwater and dirt, and pressed a glass hairpin into my hand. "Take this." My elder sister panicked. She called out to the princess, her voice tinged with grievance. But the Princess of Linhai didn't even turn her head. People often say that one's appearance reflects their heart. Your third sister's elegance must mean she has a pure heart. "Jingfu, you should look for your earrings again." With that, she helped me up with force. "Come, take me to your place." I had knelt for so long that I stumbled when I stood. The Princess of Linhai glanced at my elder sister, her eyes filled with injustice. People often judge by appearances, and today the Princess of Linhai judged me by mine, to my fortune. My residence was in the most remote part of the manor, and it took some time to get there. The princess left all the attendants outside and walked into my room with me. Looking around, the Princess of Linhai said, "I thought." She thought that with Shin Jingfu's arrogance in punishing her half-sister in the rain, the Shun family must have treated me harshly. Living in a remote place, my room would likely be bare and empty. But what she saw was a well-furnished room with incense burning, befitting a young lady's boudoir, though not comparable to the palace. I remained silent. Human nature is always complex. While my elder sister and her mother disliked me and often made a fuss over small matters to set rules for me, they never begrudged me in terms of food, clothing, and living conditions. The princess asked me, How did you meet him?" The him she referred to as this year's third-rank scholar, the eldest son of the Pei family, Peiji. I met Peiji many years ago, back when my birth mother was still alive. Before entering the Shun residence, my mother was a dancer at Chunfeng Pavilion. She conceived me by accident after a drunken encounter. She approached my father, cradling her pregnant belly. In a moment of pity, my father brought her into the residence. My mother was dazzled by the splendor of the household and did everything she could to gain my father's favor. My father, compassionate towards her, always took me to social gatherings with my legitimate mother to broaden my horizons. In truth, it was unnecessary, as I was not of age to be introduced to society. Moreover, none of the noble young masters and ladies from prestigious families thought highly of me. They called me an illegitimate child and found amusement in tormenting me during banquets. In the warm pavilion of the Pei family during a snowy winter, they deliberately spilled food on me. Under the guise of helping me clean up, they pulled out my hairpins and broke the necklace around my waist, trampling it underfoot. I had nowhere to hide and fled in panic to the garden, losing my shoes in the process, and scrambled up a tree. But my elder sister and the young lady of the Pei family found me. They called for others to use me as a target, throwing stones and mud at me. It was then that Peiji arrived. He called everyone back to play tuhu, a traditional Chinese game of throwing arrows into a pot, never saying a word to me up in the tree, yet his actions genuinely helped me. The princess smiled faintly upon hearing this. That is Peiji's way. I continued my story. Later, Peiji helped me a few more times. Meanwhile, my mother gradually fell out of favor in the residence. When I was 12, my mother had a difficult childbirth, enduring much pain before delivering a stillborn baby. She passed away soon after. With my mother gone, my father also abandoned me. I no longer attended social gatherings. A year ago, I went to Mang Mountain to pay respects to my mother and encountered a flash flood on the way back. I sent people to seek help from the nearby county office and post house. Peiji happened to be nearby and came to help. As the mud and sand poured down in the heavy rain, Peiji dragged me up to higher ground. We spent the night in a cave. At this point, the princess of Linhai's smile turned stiff. She bit her lip and asked me again, "When you were alone together, did you?" I softly said, "Peiji is a gentleman." The princess's expression relaxed slightly. Outside, the rain continued to drizzle, but it seemed to be letting up. I looked at the rain and said in a low voice, "I understand very well why the princess came to see me. Please rest assured, Your Highness, I do not dare to covet Peiji. I will always remember his kindness and pray for him and his future wife before Buddha, day and night." The princess of Linhai was pleased with my response. She gently held my hand and said, "Third Miss, after seeing you today, I realized that many of my concerns were unnecessary. When you get married, I will definitely attend your wedding and bring gifts." I nodded solemnly. The princess stayed for another cup of tea before leaving with her entourage. I watched her figure disappear into the distance before returning to my room. From a hidden compartment under the bed, I took out the earrings. The jewels lay in my palm, glistening coldly, precisely the items my elder sister had demanded I return. The princess of Linhai misjudged me. One can know a person's face, but not their heart. I had heard stories about her before. Raised in the deep palace, she was the late emperor's most beloved daughter, yet she had no arrogant temperament. She was kind and amiable. If anyone in the harem angered the emperor, they could calm his anger by having the princess of Linhai plead for them. Now on the throne was the late emperor's sixth son from a humble maternal family who was not originally a strong contender for the throne. As a youth, he was often treated with disdain in the palace, except by his half-sister, the princess of Linhai, who never looked down on him. Thus, after becoming emperor, he treated his half-sister exceptionally well, even granting her the lucrative salt territories as her fiefdom. She wanted Peiji, and I dared not compete with her. If I had known earlier that Peiji was the object of the princess of Linhai's affection, I would never have set my sights on him from the start. Competing with a princess for a man is far too dangerous. The emperor dotes on his sister and summoned all the newly appointed scholars of good standing and appearance to the palace, allowing the princess of Linhai to hide behind a screen and make her selection. The princess of Linhai chose Peiji. It was no surprise. Peiji is exceptionally handsome, his noble demeanor hard to overlook. I, too, was drawn to his striking appearance. It is true that Peiji and I met in our youth, but our later encounter, where we spent the night together in peril, was my deliberate arrangement. Because I wanted to marry him. The Pei family is a prestigious clan with a century of reputation. Peiji is a man of noble character. If I could marry him, my future would be secure and glorious. A man's battlefield is the court. A woman's battlefield is the man she marries. That night in the damp cave, I pretended to be weak and leaned on Peiji's shoulder all night. In the quiet, I heard Peiji's low voice. "If this incident becomes known and harms your reputation, I will marry you." I remained expressionless, but my heart was overjoyed. After returning to the capital, I orchestrated several chance encounters with Peiji. From the way he looked at me, I knew I had succeeded. My task was to win Peiji's heart, while Peiji's task was to convince his family to marry me. It was going perfectly until the princess of Linhai suddenly appeared as an obstacle. I deliberately stayed out of sight, letting Peiji stew for a while. By the time we met again, it was late spring. Since I couldn't climb the high branch that was Peiji, I decided to switch targets. By the Hongqi pool, the willows swayed gently. I returned a pearl the size of a fist to him, a gift he had given me. He looked at me earnestly, likely noticing my swollen eyes from crying secretly and my weight loss, caused by the heartbreak of this inevitably doomed love. Returning his pearl with tears, such a tragically beautiful ending to a love story. Even if I couldn't marry him, he had to remember my helplessness and sorrow and my pitiful and lovable demeanor. The capital is only so large. Noble families frequently cross paths. I would have use for Peiji in the future. Peiji did not take the pearl. He said solemnly, "I already know. The princess of Linhai came to see you. Yesterday, I made it clear to her that I would never marry her. The only person I love is you. Even if I face the emperor's wrath, my heart remains unyielding." I gasped. The Pei family is powerful. Peiji has the strength to defy royal authority, but I am just a minor daughter of the duke's residence. How could I withstand the emperor's wrath? I was terrified, clutching Peiji's sleeve and shaking my head repeatedly. "Peiji, you can't do this. You have a bright future ahead of you. My future also hinges on your decision. Don't ruin it for me." Peiji smiled at me. He was an extraordinarily handsome man, his smile serene and noble. In that moment, a sense of guilt rose within me, hoping Peiji would never know that my feelings for him were not entirely genuine, always mixed with self-interest. Before leaving, he said, "Don't worry." Each word struck my heart heavily. I boarded the carriage in a daze, instructing the driver to head back to the residence, oblivious to the increasingly distant sounds of the bustling market outside. Suddenly, the carriage curtain was pulled open. Facing the light, I saw the man. His face was smooth and expressionless. He said, "The emperor has summoned you. Please follow me to the palace." The sword hanging over my head finally fell. Instinctively, I shrank back, but he reached out and gripped my throat. When I regained my senses, I was in a vast palace. The room was filled with the faint scent of dragon brain incense. Palace maids stood silently by, their presence barely noticeable. On the high seat sat a young and fierce-looking man in red, wearing a 12-stringed crown, the emperor. Standing beside him was the man who had brought me into the palace. I heard the emperor address him as Zhang Rang. The emperor said, "Zhang Rang, did you handle this matter well?" His voice was cold, the indifferent tone befitting a ruler. Zhang Rang replied respectfully, "Yes, Your Majesty. A message has already been sent to the Duke's residence. Tomorrow, they will hold a grand funeral for the 3rd Mississippi." Oh! I lifted my head and scrutinized the emperor. If people can turn into ghosts after death, I need to remember his face. I feared him in life. As a ghost, I could still haunt him. Good news. I am still alive. Bad news. In the eyes of the world, I have already died suddenly. I couldn't figure out what the emperor intended. He placed me in Zhaoyang Hall, which is also his sleeping quarters. Inside Zhaoyang Hall, I could move freely, but stepping outside was out of the question. Zhang Rang kept a close watch on me. In the process of subduing me, he injured my throat, making it impossible for me to speak for 3 days. It wasn't necessary, considering my cowardly nature, which didn't require such drastic measures. Life in Zhaoyang Hall was boring and dull. No one paid any attention to me. All the palace servants here were mute, except for Zhang Rang. At first, I was anxious and uneasy, but later I realized that the worst outcome would be death. So, I decided to enjoy the good food and service while I could. The palace maids and eunuchs, though silent, took great care of me. I looked at myself in the mirror. My cheeks were rosy, my eyes bright, and I looked even better than I did at the Duke's residence. Being confined indoors makes it easy to gain weight, so walking around the hall became my entertainment. Jiayong Hall didn't look like the emperor's sleeping quarters. I had imagined an emperor's bedchamber to be lavish and extravagant. But Jiayong Hall was quite different. It contained both classics and sword racks. There was a pot for playing tohu in the corner and a human-height bronze mirror under the window. Among the treasures on display, there were also horsewhips, inkstones, and clay figurines. Interestingly, many of these items were old, and some were used by women. The emperor had spoken to me only once. When Zhang Rang brought me into the palace, he said coldly, "Qiying praised your beauty, but in my eyes, you don't hold a candle to her." Murong Qiying is the name of the princess of Linhai. I doubted his aesthetic judgment. The princess of Linhai was indeed a beauty, but compared to me, was it my character that won Peiji's heart? I wouldn't dare contradict the emperor. I am but a glowworm compared to the bright moon of the heavens. He seemed quite satisfied with my response. I spent half a month in Jiayong Hall, breathing without a title, before I saw a glimmer of hope. The princess of Linhai burst into Jiayong Hall, and we stared at each other. My hand, holding a brush, slipped, smudging the nearly completed painting of a cat playing. The princess of Linhai's eyes reddened. Disregarding her princessly demeanor, she came over, embraced me, and cried on my shoulder. She cried like a child. "I thought you had been killed by my brother because of me." Her light blue dress's hem was stained with ink, which she completely ignored, and she explained the situation in broken words. Zhang Rang finally couldn't keep a straight face and showed a look of pity. Peiji had told the princess that he already had someone he loved, which led her to come to see me. Upon learning this, Peiji once again sought out the princess, stating clearly that even if the emperor punished him, he would never marry her. The princess of Linhai was indeed a good person. Because if I were her, and Peiji spoke so resolutely, I would make sure he and his lover paid. But the princess of Linhai just had a good cry, then went to the emperor, asking him to fulfill my and Peiji's wish. The emperor was furious. Who does Peiji think he is, to reject my Qiying? An edict was issued to reprimand Peiji, and he was reassigned to a remote southern border region. The region was far from the capital and had a complex local power structure. Peiji's days there wouldn't be easy. My heart skipped a beat as I suddenly realized that Peiji knew about his demotion when we met at Hongqi Pool. Yet he spoke to me in such a gentle manner. The princess sobbed, "When I heard you died, I thought it was my brother's doing. I haven't slept well these past days, constantly thinking of you. Xinjingdang, I never thought it would come to this for you and Peiji." Her long eyelashes were wet and glistening with tears. She continued, "Peiji exhumed your grave and found that the person in the coffin wasn't you. He's now kneeling in the palace, begging my brother to see him. I came to find my brother because of this." I looked at her silently, my healed throat feeling as if it were filled with sand, until a shadow suddenly fell over me and the princess. The emperor bent down to help his sister up. "You are the jewel of our dynasty. There should be nothing in this world that makes you cry like this." He ordered the palace servants to fetch water to wash the princess's face and personally helped her fix her hair. His actions made me feel uncomfortable, too intimate. The princess of Linhai asked, "Brother, what do you intend to do by keeping Xinjingdang here? I thought I had caused her death. Heaven is compassionate. Please return her to Peiji. There are so many good men in the world. I don't want Peiji anymore. Please, brother." When she mentioned the abundance of good men in the world, the emperor's tender gaze turned cold. I held my breath, hoping it was just my imagination after being confined in Jiayong Hall for so long. The princess's plea had no effect. The emperor ordered food to be brought and forced the princess to sit beside him. He said, "Qiying, since you don't want Peiji, don't concern yourself with his affairs anymore. If he wants to kneel, let him kneel." Peiji's usefulness to the royal family never lay in his legs. As for the Shin family's daughter, I have my own plans. I saw the princess of Linhai shiver, biting her lip hard. With her soft-hearted nature, she surely didn't expect, when she extended a helping hand to her struggling brother years ago, that he would be so cold. The emperor suddenly looked at me and ordered, "Don't stay in Zhaoyang Hall anymore. Move her to Shangyang Palace." I had never heard of Shangyang Palace, but seeing the princess's surprised expression, I knew it wasn't a good place. Learning from last time, I obediently got up and walked towards Zhongrang. As sunlight hit me, I felt a strong sense of unreality. Zhongrang looked back at me and spoke to me for the first time. "Shinsanyang is indeed a beauty, but it's a pity." Pity what? That I fell into the emperor's hands and would soon perish? I hated people who spoke half-truths. If you're so capable, don't leave your last words unfinished. I didn't know what fate awaited me in Shangyang Palace, so I deliberately slowed my steps. Seeing more of the outside world was always good. Perhaps Zhongrang had a pang of conscience, for he didn't rush me. We walked along a long corridor until we saw someone kneeling at the end of the steps. Even kneeling, he held his head high and his back straight, as bright as the sun and moon. It was Peiji. I stopped involuntarily. Peiji seemed to sense something, turning his head to look at me. Our eyes met, and all our past moments flashed before my eyes. His words echoed in my ears. "You have been dishonored. I will marry you." I smiled, snapping out of it, and continued following Zhongrang. I hoped he would think I was doing well here. Peiji shouldn't be kneeling here. The emperor he served didn't care about him. His career was already half destroyed. I didn't deserve his devotion. Shangyang Palace was heavily guarded. Someone opened the heavy palace doors for me, and as I stepped inside, I heard a sigh from beside me. Because of my arrival, the palace lights gradually lit up. In the center was a pool, with dozens of ropes hanging from the beams. The water was still, like a gaping maw. The guards hoisted me up. The highest point was taller than the pear tree I used to hide in as a child in the Pei residence, but this time no one would help me. As I hit the water, cold water flooded my throat, my body uncontrollably sinking, but my mind was clear. I thought I would die. When the guards pulled me up again, I saw 2 Zhongrangs on the ground. My chest burned, my ears buzzed, and I murmured, "Stop making noise." It was only then that I realized how luxurious my days of confinement in Zhaoyang Hall had been. The next moment, the rope fell again. I couldn't tell how many times I had cycled in and out of the water. In rare moments of clarity, I wished time could reverse, and Zhongrang had strangled me to death in the sedan chair. My eyelids were heavy. When would I finally die? When I regained consciousness, I was lying on my back on the ground, staring at the Emperor's upside-down reflection. In his view, I probably looked like a dead dog. I had never hated someone so much. When my legitimate sister forcibly took my mother's gold-encrusted earrings and threw a string of pearls at me, I didn't hate her. When I faced bullying and cold stares while visiting high-ranking families as a child, I didn't hate them. When the Princess of Linhai set her sights on Peiji and I had to step aside, I didn't hate her. But now, I sincerely wished that this emperor would die on the spot. I fought to live, having done nothing wrong. Why should I be treated like this? The emperor's voice came, cold and detached. "Xinjingtang, those who are disobedient will never leave Shangyang Palace." He raised his hand, and the palace servants dragged me into the depths of the palace. When the autumn wind rose, Princess Linhai married Peiji. The emperor did not revoke the edict appointing Peiji to a post in Lingnan, so Princess Linhai requested to accompany her husband on the journey south. This marriage should have been completed long ago, but it was delayed due to the princess's previous illness. The capital quieted down at night, with the bustling crowd celebrating the marriage of the princess no longer present. The lights in the princess's mansion were still bright, but Peiji felt tired. Throughout his life, he rarely felt like a puppet being pushed along. Peiji looked at the woman sitting on the bed, then turned his gaze away, bitterness in his voice. "Princess, this was never my intention." The emperor threatened me with the life of Sanyangzi. It was at this moment that I removed the fan covering my face and brushed aside the pearls hanging from the golden crown. Peiji was astonished, then joy lit up his eyes. Jingtang. I pursed my lips. It was my luck to escape the palace alive, but my luck was mixed with guilt for those less fortunate. Peiji, Shen family's Sanyangzi, has already been buried and mourned. In public and in private, I can only be Morong Chieying. The window was probably not tightly closed, and the night wind rustled the curtains. I leaned on Peiji's shoulder, smelling the faint scent on his clothes. The past seemed like a dream. In Shangyang Palace, I experienced life and death many times, and the emperor appeared again. The high and mighty monarch looked down on me as if I were an ant. Eventually, I returned to Zhaoyang Hall. I became obedient. I had no backbone. I was just a small person. In Zhaoyang Hall, I was still restricted, but there were countless things to do. I had to quickly learn the habits of a princess cultivated over decades because the emperor wanted me to become Princess Linhai. No one would question the sudden death of Shen family's Sanyangzi, but Princess Linhai was different. Her status was noble, and the imperial relatives and officials of the clan would not easily let this matter pass. The most likely place for the plan to replace her with me to go wrong was the Pei family. So, early tomorrow, I had to put on the airs of a princess, not visiting my parents-in-law but heading straight to Lingnan with Peiji. Lingnan was remote. I could show my face there, and they would just think Princess Linhai had always been like this. Peiji, however, asked, "Where is the princess?" In the dark, I tightly held his fingers, my palms covered in fine cold sweat. Xin Jinggang is dead. The one imprisoned in Zhaoyang Hall became the princess. The princess has become a woman without status. The emperor looked at Princess Linhai with such intensity. My eyes grew hot, and I whispered very softly to Peiji, "The emperor's feelings for the princess are not like those of a brother." Peiji's expression changed drastically. In the emperor's eyes, Peiji and I were deeply in love, and Princess Linhai was the obstacle to my marriage to Peiji. So, the emperor made me become Princess Linhai, allowing me to stay with Peiji forever, even giving me the status of a princess. In some way, he fulfilled my wish, especially considering everything that happened in Shangyang Palace. I would keep the secret and play the role of Princess Linhai for the rest of my life. For Peiji, the woman he loved had returned to him in another form. Who would care about Princess Linhai? To most people, it was best to stay out of matters that didn't concern them. Peiji was silent. He gripped my hand tightly and said, word by word, "We will leave now." Setting out at night, by dawn, the capital was already far behind us. The caravan stretched for miles, winding its way forward, with only the monotonous sound of rolling wheels breaking the silence. The further south we went, the hotter it became. Peiji and I traveled day and night, resembling fugitives. Life in Lingnan was not as difficult as I had imagined. Both Peiji and I were preoccupied with our own concerns. Peiji was busy with official duties, while I busied myself with dismissing those who had followed us south, whether they were from the princess's mansion or the Pei family. Neither Peiji nor I mentioned the real Morong Chieying until New Year's Eve. In the evening, Peiji took me out of the city. The light of day changed in an instant, and hills stood tall amidst the picturesque crimson glow. I stood on the bridge, looking down at the pointed corners of the bridge pier beneath my feet. Upstream, the river water surged down, split by the pier's edge, murmuring away. The flowing water was ignorant and unaware, never feeling unrest in its heart. Peiji said, "My people have made contact with Zhang Rang. The emperor has confined the princess in Zhaoyang Hall, and she is not doing well. Every now and then, they send her medicinal soup to prevent pregnancy." I remembered the emperor's gaze and his gentle touch of Chieying's black hair, shivering involuntarily. But can Zhang Rang, the emperor's trusted aide, be relied upon? Peiji seemed to sense my thoughts and said, "Zhang Rang is my father's man." He is his father's man, not his. The Pei family, a century-old clan that has experienced dynastic changes and the ebb and flow of officialdom, would not lack a trump card. Peiji looked at the endless river and softly uttered my name, saying, "We must help her." A sovereign who indulges his own whims and disregards the world does not deserve my loyalty. Peiji. I asked, when did you start thinking like this? Peiji said, when I saw you kneeling in the palace. At first, I thought the emperor wanted to forcibly take my wife. I smirked, trying to smile. Peiji was indeed kind, but that was when he didn't know my true identity. Peiji, the solitude in the cave of Mongshan Mountain, was deliberately planned by me. Because I wanted to climb high and become the mistress of the Pei family. I am not the pure and noble young wife in your heart. I am selfish, shallow, vain, and cowardly. Without me, you would not have been involved in such troubles. The emperor wanted to possess Chiaying, not sincerely choose a husband for her. He used our feelings to assist him in carrying out his secret plans. During the selection of a husband, did Chiaying notice the emperor's unusual affection for her? Did her love at first sight for Peiji see him as an opportunity to escape her brother's control at last? He didn't say anything, just looked deeply at me and suddenly smiled. The first time I saw you on the pear tree, I couldn't help but think, there was such a beautiful young woman in the world. Later, when I saw you again, the look you gave me was full of confidence. It seemed to say, Peiji, I will give you a chance to be attracted to me. Peiji embraced me, his chin against my shoulder, his tone softer. Jingtang, between you and me, I willingly enter the game. That night, Peiji and I consummated our marriage. Changing dynasties is not easy. Despite the emperor's cold selfishness, he was diligent in state affairs. After using iron-handed methods to punish corrupt officials, the people praised this wise monarch. As for the private morality in the deep palace, no one knew, and no one cared. It was 2 years later in the winter when Peiji and I returned to the capital. The nation mourned, and heavy snow fell. The young emperor died in a rather inglorious assassination. His trusted eunuch beheaded him, meeting a gruesome end. With no heir, the court deliberated on finding a successor from the imperial family. I returned to the capital as Princess Linhai, shrouded in night, my face half hidden by a wind hat, making my way straight to the palace. In Jiaoyang Hall, I saw Marong Chiaying. Her skin was as pale as snow, untouched by sunlight for years. The princess used to cry a lot, but upon seeing Peiji and me, she did not show sadness, only smiled. You've come. We exchanged clothes, entering the inner chamber of the hall. Before entering the narrow corridor, I looked back at Peiji. He, too, met my gaze. 1,000 words were exchanged in that one look. Each to their own place, this was the plan Peiji and I had discussed long ago. There was a water clock in the secret chamber. Using the water clock, I counted the days and marked scratches on the wall. This was Chiaying's method, and the entire wall was covered with marks of varying lengths. Only when I stood in Chiaying's former position did I understand her loneliness and helplessness. Somehow, despite being in the secret chamber, I could hear voices outside clearly. I heard people arguing in the hall, palace maids whispering, and Peiji raising his voice. How dare you disrespect the princess? Later, even these voices faded away. Jiaoyang Hall was the late emperor's sleeping palace after all. It was probably sealed off, waiting for the new emperor to decide its fate. In the secret chamber, I painted scenes of cats playing. When the late emperor imprisoned me in Jiaoyang Hall years ago, this was how I passed the time. I lay on the desk, painting one after another, until Peiji came. He pulled me up, but I murmured, Peiji, let me finish. Peiji grabbed the paper and tore it, carrying me out. I was unwilling, struggling in his arms. I haven't finished painting. Why won't you let me finish? Later, I learned that when Peiji entered the secret chamber, I wasn't painting scenes of cats playing at all. Instead, I was writing, crazily scribbling with cinnabar on paper, repeatedly writing, let me out. I stayed in the secret chamber for only half a month. How Chiaying endured, I dare not imagine. Peiji took me out of the palace. His ability to do so was because the palace now had a new master. The new emperor ascended, and who else but Princess Morong Chiaying inherited the throne from the late emperor. She used the power of the Pei family, uniting with the great clans, to place herself on the throne. There had never been an empress in the dynasty, so Qiaying used Buddhism to justify herself, commissioning monks to translate the Precious Rain Sutra, proclaiming that the Buddha sent the Eastern Moonlight Celestial King to the world in female form to rule. It was hard to connect the ruthless empress with the pure princess of the past. From Peiji, I learned the truth about the late emperor's death. When we first arrived in Lingnan, through Zhang Rang, we were able to establish contact with Qiaying. Peiji promised Qiaying that he would rescue her from the late emperor's grasp. Accumulating strength in Lingnan, Peiji attempted to take control of the Pei family's power. His governance in Lingnan was effective. The people there were loyal. Even if the late emperor did not favor Peiji, he still decreed awards. One late night, Qiaying used the opportunity to create a compliance statement. When the late emperor was most vulnerable, she took out a golden hairpin from under her pillow and stabbed him fiercely in the throat. Blood gushed out, splattering her face. She wiped her hands with the curtain hanging by the bed, then used a high stool to hang the fabric from the beam. Standing on the stool and looking back on the past, she felt it was all absurd. The emperor, who had insulted his younger sister, and the princess who had killed the late emperor, how could they face their father in the afterlife? When Zhang Rang arrived, Qiaying had already kicked over the stool. He threw a dagger, cutting the fabric. Zhang Rang knelt on the ground and bowed to Qiaying. "Princess, you must live. You still have a long life ahead." His eyes filled with determination. This servant served the late emperor for nothing, but has no reason to follow him to the ground. He didn't have any other last words. Zhang Rang used the dagger to cut along the wound caused by the golden hairpin and slowly cut off the late emperor's head. Qiaying hid in the secret chamber, while Zhang Rang carried the late emperor's head to open the Zhaoyang hall door. Why did Zhang Rang do this? I tried to remember him, but couldn't recall his face. He was a eunuch, a figure less dignified and smaller in the eyes of the nobility than me, and no one knew his story. But he risked his life and showed his backbone to save Qiaying. Peiji said, "It's all over." I remained silent in his arms, hoping that the calm before my eyes could also be peace in the future. In the third year of Empress Moyin's reign, Peiji returned to Lingnan. Officially, he remained the empress's consort. I and Peiji stayed together for a lifetime, yet we could never have a formal status again. The things I held onto fervently in my youth now seem distant and indifferent. In Lingnan, I heard many stories about the empress. She was fierce in her methods, yet had a compassionate heart like a bodhisattva. Peiji ignited my life, and because of his presence, my life became meaningful, so meaningful. In the winter of the second year of Duanfang, amidst heavy snowfall, Peiji heard commotion outside. Frowning, he walked over. A group of young ladies under a tree were laughing and throwing stones at someone on a pear tree. He recognized at a glance that the leader was his own younger sister. Peiji suddenly grabbed his sister's wrist. She turned around in surprise, only to see her elder brother's cold and stern expression. On such a cold day, bringing guests here, what kind of hospitality is this? Peiji, dignified and respected, spoke, dispersing the crowd like birds and beasts. Walking at the end, Peiji looked back at the pear tree before entering the warm pavilion. The young lady on the pear tree seemed to sense something and glanced back at him. He withdrew his gaze, thinking as he ascended the steps, this young lady indeed had a striking appearance. Meanwhile, by the Tay Pond in the palace, Princess Linhai bent down and extended her hand to the sixth prince in the water. "Brother, grab my hand." She untied her cloak and handed it to the young prince who had just climbed out, completely soaked. "Third prince and the others were too much, pushing you into the water like that. I will complain to father, have him punish them severely, and see if they dare to misbehave again." As she finished speaking, she suddenly noticed someone else in the water, revealing a glimpse of a palace servant's attire. Princess Linhai became anxious and pointed, ordering the palace attendants, "Quick, save him." None of us could have imagined that within and beyond palace walls, our destinies would intertwine tightly in the future.